Hey guys, it's Joel, and I wanted to talk to you today because I get a lot of questions about what different kinds of therapies are. There's a lot of different types of therapy that you may see listed on a therapist profile or that you may see on a CEU seminar if you're a therapist. And a lot of that stuff can get confusing if you're right out of school. There's kind of a vocabulary to psychotherapy that a lot of people have, and I think it can be intimidating. It's not something that you can't learn quickly, but it definitely helps to know. If you're a patient, it helps you get into somewhere who's a good fit for you, somebody who's doing the same thing that you need or that you're interested in. And if you're a psychotherapist, you probably have picked up on things in the profession that you notice that are different, but you don't really have the words for them. So just kind of knock through some of these things pretty quickly, and hopefully that's helpful for you guys. Um, so the first thing is that so psychoanalysis is like the first kind of therapy that's what Freud does and what psychotherapists do for about 10 to 15 years after Freud. And that's the very, very, very long-term therapy. Psychodynamic therapy is the shorter-term therapy, or the shorter-term version of psychoanalysis. But essentially what you're doing there is you're going all the way back to childhood, and you're really digging into a lot of the forces there that the family of origin had on the child. And a lot of, Freud looked at a lot of more sex and violence urges than most therapists did immediately after Freud or now or ever again. He was more into that than most people are. But essentially looking at, when your mother is, when you're individuating from your mother, are you learning that you need to solve problems by asking for help, by being aggressive, assertive, demanding, by being independent, moving away from people, and learning how to solve these issues yourself? Are you learning that I can't hold actual power? I can't have that assertive self. I have to hold a passive control over my environment. So I need to be very intuitive. I need to learn how things work. I need to be able to, be manipulative or funny or charming or cute or something that lets me have control without saying this is what I want and this is what I'm going to do. Or passive control. Things like that. You get into a lot with the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic type of therapy that's looking at early childhood and how it's affecting you now and where that's working for you and where it's not. CBT is a form of therapy that's a cognitive therapy. It gets really big in the 90s. Insurance likes it a lot because CBT is focused on taking a data-driven analysis of your symptoms that are objective. So things like insight or maternal repression or energy are not data-driven. So a lot of those things leave psychotherapy when CBT comes on because it's saying, all right, you had this many incidences, frequency, intensity, and duration of anxiety. Now that is reduced to this, so therapy was effective. It's very data-driven. And the goal of CBT is to reduce symptoms. It's a cognitive therapy. REBT and ACT, if you've ever heard of those are also cognitive therapies. They're very similar. So you're going through the way that somebody's thinking, and the understanding is that by changing the script in your head, or by changing the way that you think, you're going to change behavior. So if every time I go into a situation, instead of saying, I can't do this, and shutting down, I say, it's going to be very hard for me to do this. Things like that. It's an ego management strategy. I don't think that any of those things are not helpful. I do think that if that's the only thing that you're using, sometimes it can be limiting when the issue is an issue that's beneath cognition, when it's that limbic system, emotional fight or flight energy, especially coming from trauma, or any kind of psychotic disorder, or any kind of emotion-focused problem from early childhood. That's where I see patients who kind of come in and they're like, they spend a lot of time with a very strictly CBT therapist. There's a lot of CBT therapists that love it, but they're also flexible and they're really good. But they say, I spent 4 years in therapy and my therapist kept telling me, this is why you're doing this is how you need to change it, this is what you're thinking, you need to think a different thing. And they were completely right, and I couldn't think a different thing, and I couldn't do a different thing. And so that's when I know that they're going to need a more emotion-focused therapy that's going to go underneath the cognition and get underneath that. Because, we feel emotion in our body before we feel it in our heads. And so emotion-focused therapy is kind of a therapy that looks at the way that people feel things. And DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. If you've heard of that, that's a very, very popular one. Margaret Linehan comes up with that. She has borderline personality disorder, a lot of trauma in her childhood. And she's a therapist, and she thinks, how can I make therapy different to help somebody like me whose personality issues are pushing traditional therapists away and breaking traditional therapy systems. And so DBT is very much about understanding, it's a lot of Eastern mindfulness is kind of in that system. So there's a lot of parts of DBT that deal with calming down, being aware of your body, feeling the present moment, because anxiety is going to be coming from the past or the future. I'm worried that these bad things happened, I didn't like them, I can't stop thinking about them, or, I'm worried that this is going to happen again, I don't like that. But if I calm down and I get in the actual moment, in this present moment, there's not that much bad stuff going on. I mean, maybe my coffee's getting cold or I'm getting a sunburn, but there's not anything that's an immediate emergency that would make me panic. I mean, that kind of anxiety is coming from the past and the future. So when we can pull ourselves into the present, we can be much more mindful. So DBT therapy is about finding your wise self. That we kind of have all these thought processes going on all the time that are pulling us out and making us kind of fixate and do things. But when we can shut those down, at the very kind of center of ourselves is our soul self or our wise self that knows what's best for us. When we are calm, it can actually make an informed decision. And there's a lot more to DBT than this. There's a lot of ideas about not needing to control other people or be upset by other people's understanding of who you are. Because you can understand that there's multiple truths out there. And that my truth can be different from your truth, and that doesn't mean that I have to change you or change my truth. That I can sit with that subjective nature of the world. So again, this is kind of that Eastern type philosophy kind of comes into therapy in the 60s. DBT definitely has a piece of that. I don't know if Linehan ever says that, but you can kind of feel that zeitgeist of culture definitely being part of what she does. You also, a lot of people are using EMDR right now. EMDR is more of a brain science thing than it is an intuitive therapy thing. Like, I can explain how a lot of this stuff works and say, like, well, this is what it's doing. EMDR is about eye movement. If you have trauma, I mean, one of the ideas with trauma is that with PTSD, something like that, there's kind of a stuck memory. And that stuck memory is written when that amygdala is so activated that what's written into the brain is wrong, because all the alarm bells in your brain are ringing at the highest volume. So when it's written into the brain, it's almost written incorrectly, like a stuck memory or a corrupted computer file. So you click it, it's going to crash the whole system. So I can think about a different memory, a normal memory, like, well, 5 years ago this happened, and I felt that way at that time. With a trauma memory, you're going to be reliving it. I can't do that. If I'm thinking about it, I'm feeling that right now. And culturally, we have this idea that PTSD is like, there's a bang at the cookout, a firework goes off, and then a Vietnam videotape plays, and then someone's like, hey, Bill, you all right, buddy? And it can maybe be like that, but that's not very common. I mean, the things that you experience are sometimes visual, sometimes audio, or a thought that you're kind of relive, but usually it's a body feeling. You want to get into this posture. All of a sudden, these muscles tighten up right here. My back tightens up and locks up. And the feeling that I have about myself, what my fight or flight limbic system is telling me about who I am and what the world is, that reality doesn't match this reality, it matches an old one. So I'm vulnerable, I have to curl into a ball and disappear. Or I'm responsible, this is my fault, I have to fight, this is the most important thing. That comes out in a moment where it doesn't fit and it isn't helpful and it's doing damage to us. So EMDR is an eye movement therapy. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And the therapist is going to move your eyes in a way that kind of turns on that creative part of the brain, and lets you process that memory to where it is more like a normal memory. Brain spotting is a similar therapy, if you've heard about that. It's similar to EMDR, but there's not movement. It's more about finding the position. A lot of times the eye position is the position that your eye was in during the trauma. So it kind of reactivates that system, and you can learn to process it and calm it down. Brain spotting is a lot more open. The therapist has a lot more freedom. It's not as much of a controlled protocol. So there's a lot more of the therapist's kind of creativity and the client's creativity as they kind of work together to find the best way to treat your trauma. So those are the big ones. If you have any questions about any models of therapy that you're seeing thrown around, any buzzwords that you don't know what they are, and you want me to parse it for you or give you my take, I'm happy to do that. I'm an eclectic therapist, so I don't think that one of those things works for everybody, and I don't think that one solution fixes every problem. So therapy with me looks completely different with any patient that comes in, because I work with you to figure out who you are. So that's what eclectic means, if you see that around. I don't ever want your problem to have to fit my solution. So if we try something in therapy and it doesn't work, and you hate it in therapy with me, that doesn't mean that you can't get better, or that you shouldn't tell me because it's my favorite thing and it's the only thing I know how to do and I'll be sad. It just means we put down that tool, we move on to another one. Because people are built differently. I think working with the individuality of the person is extremely important. I wish that more therapists did that. It's hard to do because you have to admit that you don't know. I don't know. I haven't found the model of therapy that works best for everybody. I'm still reading, I'm still learning, I'm still kind of digging into the breadth and the depth of this profession. And I think being with that mystery is something that we ask our patients to do, be with the mystery of this that you don't know. And I try and do that professionally. So a lot of my eclecticism comes from this need to be open and to be able to really listen to patients without trying to fit what they're saying into a real strict model, but just kind of trying to hear the most effective way that I can what they need. And I would encourage you to do that too. Whatever model of psychotherapy you practice, trust yourself and trust your patients. So if there is any questions that anyone's got, give me a shout, and I hope you guys are having a good day. I will talk to you tomorrow.